How much prepping is too much prepping? Hey, welcome to Ranchero. Thank you for being here with us. This is my wonderful wife, Robin, from Robin on the Farm. And today we're going to talk about prepping, but about too much prepping. Is there such a thing? Can you have too much stuff to be prepared for? Let's talk about it. Let's see. We started prepping about 20 years ago, right after we got married. We started to gather extra food, and we started to can wheat, and we started to do lots of things that we felt like would help us in case of emergency. Now, back then, it wasn't even called prepping. It was called food storage, I guess is all it was called. We were just getting food storage. But now it's taken on a whole nother level of being prepared. And so today I want to talk a little bit about how much is too much. I mean, we've had to move. We've had to make some big moves over the years. And I'll tell you, some of the biggest struggle is moving some of our preparedness things. And now as we're talking about moving again, we're in that same boat. We're sitting here going, how much of this do we really need? How much do we really need to have to be prepared to survive? I don't know. I think there's probably a lot of things that we could do without. So let's talk about it. What are our main things that we really feel are the most important when it comes to prepping?
Definitely food. Definitely food.
Yeah.
Food's high on my priority list.
I think for me, food, water and food, we put those in one category. That's really like my number one, water and food. My second would be essentials. I kind of have three main items. Water and food, your essentials, which I would say would be if you have a medication that you have to take that you may not survive without, that may be something you want to see if you can somehow stockpile. Now there's some ways that you can do that nowadays, and we'll talk a little more about that, but I would say essentials could include, medicines or hygiene items, soaps, toothpaste, toothbrushes, those kind of things. And we can talk more in detail on those as well. And then my third thing is a way to safeguard you and your prepping supplies. So food, let's talk about food. Can you have too much food?
I don't think so.
No? So that food is the heaviest thing. So if you're talking about storing, there's different levels. You have all your long-term storage, which is things that'll last for 25, 30 years. And then you have some shorter life, some of the canned goods will last 5 years or more. And then you have other things that may only last a year or so. But all of those canned things and buckets of wheat, and man, they're heavy. They're heavy to move. They're heavy to store.
And we've done it a lot.
And we have. But I would agree. In my mind, if there's something that's worth storing and keeping and moving around, it is that food.
Yeah.
So back, a few years ago, we were actually in the process of moving out here, and we had our food storage for years and years and years, and we never had to use it. We would always cycle through it a little bit because you don't want to just leave it there and have it expire. So you want to use it.
But if you have something that's all sealed up and good for 25, 30 years, you don't just want to open it up and use it for nothing.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like you put it away just for that. Now, if it's getting towards the end of the 25 or 30 years and you want to start using it, it makes sense. So we're like, we really don't want to have to move all this stuff across country. Let's start using it up. And about the time that happened, we all know what happened a few years ago. We had all the stores were getting shut down and everything that was going on. And we were going, why? Why did we use all of our food? We didn't think anything like that was ever going to happen because we'd been doing this for 17 years and
luckily
never
we
had
still
to use
had
it.
A ton of our long-term storage, but our short-term 3 to 6 month stuff, we were eating that stuff up.
We were like, we don't want to move
no
it.
tomorrow.
And then finally, the one time we need it, we had used it up.
Yep.
So I feel like food, it comes, there's different ways to start. You need to start with 72 hours. You want to have a 72-hour supply of food and water. That's your first step. Once you've reached that goal, then you can expand that to 2 weeks. 2 weeks of food and water. Once you've gotten to that point, I would jump it up to a 3-month supply of food. It can be hard to store that much water, but at that point, I would say you have a filtration system to where you can then be able to replenish your water supply. And if you want to go from there, you can go to that 1 year supply of food. I think that's pretty much the max for us. You know, if there was something that happened like a nuclear winter or some volcano that erupted and the crops weren't going to grow for a couple years, you know, that could happen. It's happened before, but you would want to have a good supply. Most likely, most events, most things are going to happen. You'll be able to get food again within a few months, but you just never know. So that's the number one on my list, food and water. Start out small, work your way up, because you just can't survive without it. There's no surviving. Now, the next things, your essentials, I would say your medications. That's something that's tricky, because a lot of times you can only get enough to get you through 1 month at a time. There's the Jace Medical. We've actually looked into that, and we've actually ordered some things for them for some antibiotics, but they've actually expanded that into allowing you to order different medications now. So there's more and more ways and opportunities to stockpile some critical medications if you need them. Outside of that, how much shampoo, how much toothpaste, I mean, how much toilet paper do you need?
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, I don't know.
I don't know either.
That's kind of a convenience thing. Can you survive without toilet paper? We asked our kids that, and our 10-year-old said, no way. But I think in the long run, I mean, if you had enough to get you by for a while, if you really had to, you could survive without toilet paper. Now, do we want to? No. But there's things like that you could actually live and survive without. So how much of it do you carry? How much of it do you stock? It's kind of nice to have a few months supply of all those essentials.
Yeah, I really like to have a year supply. I like that.
Yeah.
To plan on having a year supply. And it's funny how you start using stuff and all of a sudden you're almost out and you got to go restock.
Yeah, yeah.
I think those things are good. But then there's also, at what point do you have too many sleeping bags or tarps or tents or lanterns or whatever?
So when it comes to the essentials now, that the second thing we're talking about with having the essentials, what is actually essential? So yeah, we have flashlights, we have lighters and matches, and we have can openers. I mean, a can opener is probably something you need for food, and you have sleeping bags and tents and all these things. So you're going, we bought tents and sleeping bags 20 years ago, and we finally just started using them because the kids were going on some campouts with some youth groups and they needed them. We never used them before that. We've been hauling them all around. So, man,
it's nice to have them, but you don't have to have those kind of things.
I think you could do without. So a flashlight, definitely nice to have. Could you survive without it? Yeah. For sure. You could survive without a flashlight, but it would be nice to have. Do you need 10 flashlights? Do you need all the different kinds of, I mean, obviously there's solar powered ones, which would be great because your batteries are only going to last so long. So then how many batteries do you need to keep? Those are the kind of things where when it comes to essentials, other than your medications, I'd like to try to have at least a 3-month supply of those. So if I think I'm going to be using flashlights and I can have a 3-month supply of batteries to occasionally power my flashlight, that makes sense for me. Outside of that, hopefully that's given us enough time to be able to regroup and figure out what to do from there. If we're in a situation where you're needing to survive for longer than 3 months, there's probably a lot bigger problems out there. So I don't know. What are some of the other essentials that we have?
Cooking essentials like our cast iron skillets and pots.
Yep.
I think those are pretty important to have.
Got to have a way to cook your food.
Yeah, and we can use those daily and also for emergencies.
So the cast iron is a really good thing to do because you can pretty much set aside most of your pots and pans. You can use your cast iron every day, and if you really needed to use it in a survival situation, you can cook over a fire with it, over coals. If you still have access to your oven, there's lots of different ways, and then you can carry just a few of those with you and still be able to use them if you were not being able to stay in your home or wherever it was that you were camped out. Yeah, so you need cooking utensils, right? What else? Cooking pots and pans. We're talking cast iron pots and pans. What else when it comes to the cooking stuff? Because you got to have a way to cook your food sometimes. Yeah. Some of these canned goods, crack them open, you can eat them cold. Yeah. No problem. You know, it's nice to have some seasoning. I think salt, it adds into, that's part of your whole food thing. Yeah. Salt is heavy too.
Yeah.
So
think some maybe glass jars and canning supplies, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so all of a sudden it can get carried away, right? All of a sudden it gets heavy. All of a sudden it gets to be a lot.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden you're like, wow, this could be nice to have, and I'd really like to have this.
Yeah.
But I think when we look at our food, as long as you've got a couple pots and pans and your food in there and a way to cook it, and a lot of it doesn't need to be cooked. But what about your wheat? If you're storing wheat, wheat lasts for a really long time. It's a great long-term storage item, but how do you process it? So we have electric wheat grinders.
Yep.
All of a sudden you need a hand grinder if you don't have power.
Yep.
But that's a pretty small item, but you have to have a way to be able to use it.
Yeah.
So it doesn't make sense to store all that wheat if you have no way to use it either.
Yeah. That reminds me, growing up, I thought that we had food storage, like my family growing up, but really we had buckets and buckets of wheat that was stored in our crawl space in the South, in the humid, wet crawl space. And so we had a lot of buckets of wheat. I'm sure if we had cracked them open, they would have had weevils and stuff like that. But I don't know if we even had a wheat grinder. I never saw one. So kind of thought we were prepared, but I don't think we were.
So those are some things that might be essential for actually using your food. Right, so there's some things I think that are critically important when it comes to that. But gosh, there's so many things that if you watch a lot of these prepping YouTube channels out there, they're like, you need to get this, you need to buy that, you need to have a stockpile of pencils and socks and this and that, and you're like. Oh, and have some paper too, and make sure you got all your books that you need, and so all of a sudden you're stockpiling all of this stuff, and you're just complicating your life trying to prepare for the end of the world. Whereas most of those things, if you have all the money in the world and all the space in the world to store all those things, and you got enough money to have the big old bunker to put it in, that's great. But most people don't. So we're trying to stick to what is it that you really need, how much is too much.
And I think another really important thing is to have the skills. Sometimes it's not about money and stockpiling and having things. Sometimes you have to have the skills to know how to
It's true. So like
get by.
In your food category, you may have seeds in there because you need to actually have a way to regrow food. But if you've never done that before, good luck, because it may work out and it may not. But if you've been able to do that over the years, you've kind of prepared yourself to grow those things, then you have a better idea of what to do, when to plant, when not to plant.
Yeah.
And as far as cooking the food too, if you've never cooked food and you've always gone out to eat, but you're like, hey, I've got all my food storage in there, and it's all the freeze-dried stuff that I don't even know what to do with, or dehydrated food that you have to rehydrate.
Yeah.
I
think it's good to have backups to everything. Maybe you have seeds. Maybe you have a bunch of cans of beans. Maybe you have a bunch of dry beans. Got to make sure you have enough water to make all that stuff. Make sure you have a pot to put it in. So it's important to have a lot of things, but you don't need to have rooms and rooms and rooms full of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and so when it comes down to what kind of food you're going to have, we go back to that long-term storage. We've got our wheat that we're storing. Because it'll last forever, it's something we can buy and put away for 25 or 30 years and not think about. You've got your rice, you've got your dried beans, you've got sugar, salt, what else? Oats. A lot of your freeze-dried items will last that long too now. So there's a whole array of foods that you can get that'll last that long. But when it comes to canned goods, a lot of those are only good for a few years. So all those long-term items that we have, it's good. There's a lot of carbohydrates in there, but we need some meat and proteins as well. So there's a lot of good canned meats that we've bought over the years that we have a 4 or 5 year shelf life that we can cycle through every 4 or 5 years. And then you get into your fruits and your vegetables, and a lot of times those are only good for a couple years. So you have to cycle through those a lot more. So all of those items are great things to have and to store. And in my mind, I don't think you can have too much food. I think 2 weeks supply of water is probably your minimum. If you can store more than that, that's great. But at least have a way to filter your water for an extended period of time past that. So let's talk about the third item, a way to be able to safeguard your family and your prepping items, your food and your water and your essentials. So obviously shelter is important. There's a lot of different ways that you can safeguard your food. There's a lot of different ways that you can safeguard your family. but find a way that works good for you. And that can include shelter, that can include protection. Those are going to be important things as well. So if there really was an emergency situation and everything turned into chaos, you need to have a way to protect you, your family, and your food and essentials. So those three things. How much of it should you keep? How much of it should you use? How much of it should you store? That's a good question, right? Let us know your thoughts. Let us know how much you think you should store and how much you should have on hand. The things that you think are absolutely essential, the things that you could not live without. And thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it, and take care.